Hi everyone, good evening. We're going to get started now. So before I introduce myself, I'd just like to thank you all for coming. I'd just like to go over the format of the event because it's a two-part event tonight. So we have our guest speaker from 6 to 7 p.m. And after the presentation concludes, me and my colleague over here will be moderating questions. Then we'll be opening up Q&A to the audience. But after that, that's when a little bit more of the fun begins, although it will be fun to do, of course, later. So from 7 to 8, we have catering from Lubbock Local and the Greyhound Cafe. So we'll be moving up to Sykes Barns B and C. So that will be upstairs. We'll have students greeting you as well. We have lots of food. It's going to be a great time. So let's get the show underway. So first, I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Josh Filer. So I'm a third-year finance and economics student here. I'll also be interning at St. Gobain in the summer as a strategic business analyst. I'm president of Veg Out. So for those of you who are new or from Investor Group, if you don't know, Veg Out is the campus's plant-based eating and vegan club. It's a great place to make friends, have local community, but also just have open dialogue. Then also right now, I'm currently the interim fund manager for the investment group. And next year, I'm going to be the vice president. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Corcimiglia.
All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Corcimiglia. I'm a senior finance and accounting student here at Westchester. And I'm the president of the investment group. Currently a consulting intern at Radio, where we started full-time in June. But a little bit about me and a little bit about the investment group. So the student investment group on campus is about 5 years old. And what we do is we provide a really good opportunity for students to manage about $70,000 to the university's endowments. This is real money, students that are putting in long hours of research, putting in a lot of hard work, where they're able to gain valuable industry experience that they can then take into their full-time roles. But that's enough about me. So pass it back on.
Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for the night. So Mr. David Benzaquen is one of the world's leading experts in the plant-based food industry. He spent nearly a decade in a corporate strategy consulting firm for plant-based food companies. He also founded one of the world's first plant-based seafood companies, and he also serves as an advisor to multiple food accelerators, and also multiple venture capital firms about which deal with the plant-based food industry. So he and his companies have been profiled in the New York Times, USA Today, Los Angeles Times, Fast Company, Wired Incorporated, CNN, and many, many more. He also drove 2.5 hours down here today from New York. Had a little bit of traffic, but he made it all right. So if you could all join me in giving a warm Westchester University welcome to Mr. David Benzaquen.
Thank you so much for playing, Josh. Particular thank you to Josh for making sure that I can never get any legal trouble in Westchester because my face is everywhere. Pretty terrifying. Apologies to all of you for that. So I really appreciate being here. My story begins with my on-campus experience, and I'll be getting into that. I want to share a little bit about my background, but also talk more about the industry that I'm a part of, why I think it's such an exciting space to be in, and why I'd love for you to join me in this industry. So the name of my talk is Money Really Does Grow on Trees. I really believe that the future of our food industry doesn't just have the opportunity to be based on plants, but I think it has to be based on plants if we want to avoid serious financial and other peril. So this is me in 2002. That is a heart sticker on my cheek. I'm as hippie as can be. I was a freshman in college, and the first day of my college experience, I went to doing orientation. I went to the student clubs fair, and I came out of high school super excited to go to college with the goal of finding how I could have an impact. That was all I cared about, was where can I make a difference? And so I went to the student clubs fair thinking, I'm going to find every activist club and I'm going to find out how they're changing the world. And I went to the death penalty club. And so for those of you who don't know, 2002, the war in Iraq was just starting up. George W. Bush was president. And so I went to the death penalty club and I said, what are you guys doing as the club? And they said, oh, we're writing to President Bush asking him to sign clemency agreements. This is the president who executed more people in history than any before. And I said, okay, well, anti-war club, what are you doing? Oh, we're protesting to stop the war. Okay, well, I support that. Not sure it would make much of a difference, but okay. And finally, I went to the plant-based or vegan club. And I didn't know much about this issue. I've been vegetarian kind of for passive reasons and didn't really know how much I felt about it. And I asked the woman who was leading the club about what the group did and why she was promoting this. And she said, every single time you sit down to eat, you can eat in a way that saves your life, other animals' lives, and protects the planet. Never had I been given the power with my own tool for my own dollar to save lives. And that changed my life forever. And so I immediately got involved in that club and became very active in the animal protection movement. And I spent the next few years interning for every animal protection group I could, graduated college, went straight to PETA of all places, went to work at all these organizations, and was just thrown into this movement. And so let's talk a little bit about what motivated me to get involved in this, why this is just part of my talk, but why I think it'd be really great for you to explore how much power we have as individuals to change the world through this movement. So first, let's talk about sustainability. Many people have heard these issues, but it doesn't often get talked about how tremendous it is across all types of food. So the average vegetable, if you look at spinach, if you look at kale, if you look at potatoes, if you look at beets, the average vegetable takes about 10 gallons of water to produce 4 ounces of protein. Now, if you look at the same exact serving size of animal proteins, you see that the numbers are much, much, much higher. Even for ones that are not spoken about, like fish and milk and eggs, it's still multiples higher. Secondly, land. Over 75% of all the world's arable land is being used for livestock. Every single year, countless thousands of acres of the Amazon are being raised to replace with feed crops to feed animals or with actual grazing lands for cattle. And not only is this affecting access to arable land for growing grain and food for humans, it's also killing countless species and making countless species extinct. We've actually accelerated our species loss on this planet by 60% since the introduction of human beings to the planet. And that's almost entirely in the last 50 years with the introduction of intensive animal agriculture. That's greenhouse gas emissions. You often hear people talk about the impact of beef and how cows produce a lot of methane, and that produces a lot of greenhouse gas. That's true, but it's actually every single one of the animal products that does the same. In fact, animal agriculture combined is responsible for more greenhouse gases than every car, ship, plane, and train combined in the world. And that's according to the UN. So, like I said, we really can make a difference with every single bite we take. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'm going to tell a personal story about this pig because it speaks to my personal heart. This pig is Johnny. Johnny's a pig that I rescued when he was 3 months old. I used to work for an organization called Farm Sanctuary. This was a long time ago, 12 years ago, something like that, no more, 14 years ago. And I got to know Johnny. He was a pig that was left behind in a flood in Iowa. Actually, it was 2008, so it was 14 years ago. There was a flood that on the eastern coast of Iowa, and 25 million pigs were left behind. All these gestation cells, the mother pigs that from which baby pigs are bred. And there was an emergency evacuation, and everybody left except for the animals because they couldn't take them out. And so my organization was called in to go in and rescue animals. When I met Johnny, he was 3 days old, and he fit literally in the palm of my hand. He had pneumonia, and he was with his 13 brothers and sisters. And I couldn't see him at first because when I got to the levee where these pigs were, what happened was this one farmer had decided out of compassion to unlatch the crates and the cages in the farm before he abandoned them. And so these pigs had swum or floated 30 miles on debris to this levee. And when we found them, all we saw was these very, very large sows. But we heard all this squealing and we couldn't figure out why. And when we got near the mother pigs, we were trying to help them. When we got near them, they get very angry. We understood they were scared. They'd been sitting there for days getting sunburned with no protection from the elements. But there was something strange about it. It was almost as if they were protecting their young, but there was no young anywhere. And so as we got closer, we started seeing one little head pop out, and then another, and another. 20 mother sows and over 60 baby piglets that they were lying on top of because they were trying to protect every one of those baby piglets from the sun. The mothers had 4 inches of sunburned skin peeling off, and the babies were untouched because they'd been protecting them that entire time. And so when we finally convinced the mothers that we were there to help, I took Johnny and many of the others with my friends, and we were able to rescue them and bring them to the sanctuary where he worked. But I had always been passionate about this issue based on the facts, but I never personally connected with animals. In fact, I'm somebody who never had a dog or a cat at home, and I never really connected with animals because I connect with people verbally, and so I couldn't really do that. But here I really saw the life, the sentience, the passion, the emotion, the beauty of these animals one-on-one. So the reason I bring up Johnny is because I want you to realize that every single year, there are 50 billion Johnnies in this world that we are losing to the food industry. 50 billion. I don't like to give those numbers without a context because we really get lost in how big that number is. When we think of the individuals, it makes it much more real and salient. And then I want to mention quickly on human health. The American Dietetics Association, which used to be called the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, is the largest association of nutritionists and dietitians in the world. It happens to be the one here. And it's a highly respected organization that represents that whole industry. And they have said repeatedly that plant-based diets, vegan diets are not only safe, but actually are shown to reduce risk of ischemic heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and certain kinds of cancer, namely reproductive and prostate and things like that. And that they're good for all stages of life. So, now, we've got through the emotional stuff, the painful stuff. Let's talk about the business, because that's why I'm here, right? You want to know how I make money. It's not why I do it, but let's talk about it. So, the plant-based industry, which I'm a part of, represents alternatives to meat, dairy, eggs, seafood, and this industry has been booming over the last decade, but particularly over the last 5 years. So what is it that happened that caused this? You can see right here that starting just 4 years ago, the market just started growing so quickly. Everybody knows that tofu and soy milk have been around a long time, but what happened? Well, what happened is that in 2015, an organization called Meatless Mondays broke through. Partnering with Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future, they started putting out advertisements to talk about how just reducing your meat and dairy consumption by 1 day a week could have amazing impacts on the environment. And that started resonating with people because a lot of people might not be ready to give up all their animal protein tomorrow, and that's okay. What they said is you can still make a massive impact if you just make a little shift. And that really clicked. And so the movement, which had once been about these crazy purple-haired vegan hippies like me one day, was now suddenly saying, we can all make a difference if we expand our minds. But I had a challenge. When I was working for those animal rights organizations and advocating for this issue like I have been with you all today thus far, somebody spoke to me about it and they said, well, I have a question for you. I said, okay. He said, why do you support sweatshops? What? I can't support sweatshops. I did an internship against sweatshops. I was part of the United Students Against Sweatshops Club. What are you talking about? He said, well, what are you wearing? Okay. He said, yeah, those clothes are made in sweatshops, right? I said, probably. He said, why are you doing that? And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I said, you know, I don't know where to find sweatshop-free clothes that are attractive, affordable, convenient. And he said, when you solve that problem for me, I'll go vegan. That changed my life. And suddenly I said, you know what? I've been spending all this time telling people what to do. And really the problem is not one of demand. People are willing and wanting to make better choices. We need to reduce the barriers to make those choices easier and more desirable. And that led my journey to going from hippie activist to venture capitalist. So if you look at this slide here, you can see the growth of the market growing more than 10% in 2018, 2019, almost 30% the following year, an additional 6% the year after that, even more this past year. And that's because the maturity of the market, the awareness that people can make these choices without having to sacrifice anything is becoming more obvious. Two other factors are a big difference, and this is really important to consider when you're thinking about business. The things that make the biggest impact on increasing a market size is convenience, price, and desirability, or in this case, taste. Taste, price, convenience. Those are the three factors. If you ask consumers what they care about, they're all going to say they care about all kinds of virtuous things. But when it comes down to it, when they're in the supermarket or they're in the restaurant or they're in the clothing store, they have limited wallets, they have limited time, and they have to make decisions based on a lot of factors that limit them. And so overwhelmingly, they are going to make choices, not out of selfishness, but just because out of what opportunities they have, out of taste, price, and convenience. Well, what's happened? Since the increase in awareness and the adoption of flexitarian or reducitarian diets in the last 10 years, we've seen a huge growth in investment into the plant-based industry because people say, there's a lot more demand now, so we can put money into this because this is something that can make money. And then these companies get money and they say, now I have money, I don't have to just sell soy milk, I can invent this thing called cashew milk or oat milk or something else. And so more innovation happens. And then they start farming more and scaling their production. And so prices go down. And so prices become more affordable. So the growth in the industry is fueled both by supply and demand. Consumers opened their minds to this, investors and businesses responded. Now, soy milk has been around since the Ming Dynasty. And yet, until 2016, non-dairy milks were 1% of all fluid milk sold in the US. Today, non-dairy milks represent 15% of all milk sold in the United States. Why? Not because everybody suddenly decided that milk is evil, but because they said, you know what? I really like the way an almond milk latte tastes. I might still like my cheese. I might still like regular dairy milk in my cereal, but this one I really like. Options lead to choice. Choice leads to choosing new things. So the market is growing. You may have heard, however, some fears over the last few months that the market is slowing down. Oh no, Beyond Meat is losing market share. What does that mean? So everybody's talking about how the industry is slowing down because there are 3 plant-based companies on the New York Stock Exchange that are public. One is Tofuti, which is a many-year-old tiny company known for cream cheese that is on the pink sheets, meaning they are a penny stock because they are pretty poorly run because they haven't innovated their products in 30 years. I actually grew up eating that stuff because I grew up kosher. And so that was our option to eat when we were eating meat. We ate non-dairy, and so that was what I grew up eating. But that doesn't satisfy a lot of people today when there's so many other options. The other 2 companies are Oatly and Beyond. And one thing about taking a company into the public markets is that suddenly you're open for everybody to see all of your works. And a lot of companies today are thinking about going public as a way to increase their access to capital, but what they're not thinking about is whether their financial fundamentals are really there and ready for that. So the markets are responding to some challenges that 2 companies are having and making that reflect what they think is the entire market. I mean, every single day I'm hearing these articles about how Beyond Meat shows that there's a slowdown or that we've hit peak plant-based. And then I look at the market sales for the last year. So this is a chart that shows you the delta between plant-based and animal-based sales of each of these categories. The only one which was flat was meat. And actually, if you look at the category, There are a lot of factors that change that, including the fact that food service, meaning restaurants, increased sales dramatically more than animal meats because the pandemic shit. So I would make a strong case that actually plant-based is really strong right now, and that's why I am privileged to be doing what I love and making a living at it. So, how do I think about my investments? I look at investments the way that many others do. Granted, I have a mission lens on it, but it's about supply and demand. I look at opportunities where I believe that the demand outpaces the supply, and there is an opportunity to disrupt the industry. And so deli meats is one that I'm looking at really strongly right now. I am desperate to find a company making really good plant-based deli meats, and let me tell you why. The market for plant-based burgers in the United States is $1.1 billion. How often do we eat burgers? Well, we eat cold cut sandwiches about 6 times as often. Yet the market for plant-based deli meats is $40 million. And the largest share of that is Joe Turkey, which has $28 million of that, which is a company run by a wonderful man, a dear friend of mine, but a company that has not really innovated on their deli meats ever, or at least in 20 years. I've been eating those for many years. It's not my favorite thing. I like some of their other products better. And so I look at that and I say, if the burger category is $1 billion, the deli meat category could easily be $6 billion, assuming no growth of the burger category, if it just matched the same proportion of meals for consumers. But right now, nobody has solved for that because consumers aren't yet satisfied with the products that are available. And so I am actively, if you know of anybody, looking for a plant-based deli meat company to fund to fix that delta. The other one is yogurt. So most people think that yogurt is saturated and is a hard market to disrupt. But one of the companies that I own is a consumer research company. What that means is that I have thousands of American consumers in a panel, in a group online that we do research with. And these are all people that buy plant-based alternatives at least once every 3 months, but almost none of them are vegetarian or vegan. Because that's the audience that I want to understand, right? From a mission standpoint, right? Getting one vegan to switch from one veggie burger to another doesn't do much good. But from a business standpoint, 1% of the American population is vegan. 5% is vegetarian. 40% say they're trying to reduce their meat intake. Who do I want to make money on? So when I look at the yogurt category, since Chobani and a lot of other companies have been soaring in the yogurt category for years, actually in the last 3 years, dairy yogurts have started to decline because there was such a saturation. Over a number of years, we lost pudding, we lost Jell-O, all of these other spoonables, as we call them, started disappearing from the shelves as yogurt took over and took out the whole section of the refrigerator. But non-dairy yogurts are trying to catch up. And there's been a struggle there because people aren't always satisfied with the taste and everything. And so I did a study and I found out that 30% of American households last year bought a non-dairy yogurt at least once. And yet, non-dairy yogurts represent less than 2% of yogurt sales. So what does that say to me? That says to me that there's a lack of satisfaction, right? If I try it and I don't go back to it, something went wrong. And so we did that research and we asked people who had tried non-dairy yogurts but not stuck with it, what was it that made you turn away? And overwhelmingly, we heard, I choose non-dairy milk already. I'd be thrilled to choose non-dairy yogurt. I do believe it's healthier. I do believe it's more sustainable, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't like the options. And so to me, that's a huge opportunity. So just recently, I made an investment in a company that's launching now the new yogurt because I believe that through taste tests that I did, that their texture is really disruptive and that they could be a new player that could garner the attention of those kinds of companies. So those are just some examples of how I think about investment decisions and why I go after the categories that I do. I'm going to quickly go through my portfolio in case it's interesting. And then we're going to take questions, and I want to be able to answer any questions about whatever you'd like, including how do you get into this industry if you're interested or anything else. Maybe I should start, I'll dive into my background a little bit more. So after the animal rights world, I spent a few years while I was working in the nonprofit world. So I got my master's in nonprofit management, and I spent 2 years mapping out the food industry because I came to believe that I could make a bigger difference in business than I had in the nonprofit world, like I said. And actually, so that sweatshop thing really tipped me off. And then I audited some classes in consumer choice theory and choice architecture and in consumer psychology and in marketing. And I decided I wanted to better understand what motivated behavior change. And what I came to realize was exactly what that gentleman had said to me. People are motivated by being given solutions, not pointed out problems. And so I thought, man, what if I could help companies that finally, I've been vegan for years, and I was finally having some questions like, you know what, this one's actually pretty good. Maybe I could convince some non-vegans to eat this. What if I could help those companies improve their marketing, improve their messaging, improve their strategy, get out there more effectively to appeal to a broader audience? So that's what I did in the industry. So in 2010, I started my first company. I recruited 6 people who had worked in big food companies, Kraft, Unilever, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, General Mills, and Coca-Cola, all in marketing and strategy roles. And with those people, we started doing consulting for plant-based food companies to help them improve their strategy. Some of them we were helping launch from scratch, helping them decide things like, what channel do I sell in? Meaning, do I sell in food service, restaurants and colleges, retail, direct to consumer, farmers markets? What should I do? So we helped them figure that out. Sometimes it was pricing strategy. If yogurts on the shelf sell between $3 and $4, should I be on the cheaper end or the more expensive end? How do I decide that? Sometimes it was branding, sometimes it was sales and marketing, whatever it was. We worked with companies large and small to work on their strategy. And I had that firm for 9 years. What happened? Well, I was really, really early. And my whole family and everybody I knew thought I was absolutely nuts. They all were terrified. I named my company Plant-Based Solutions. And everybody back then, nobody had heard the phrase plant-based. I just knew that it was less alienating than vegan. So that's why I chose it. But everybody thought I was going into potted plants. I'm not even kidding. I had literally people tell me that they thought I was going to be selling flowers. This was 12 years ago. I started that business, but there were so many companies that were new to market or that started after I started my company that had nothing set up yet. And so they hired me and they didn't have any capital. They didn't have any money. So they hired me on sweat equity. And they said, look, we don't know where this is going to go, but we really would love to have your help. Can we give you a piece of our company in exchange for an opportunity to help us grow? And I did it. I took a lot of risks and I made $20,000, $30,000 the first 4 years of my business personally so that I could take these risks. Well, 2 of those companies, one was called Gardein and one was called Daya. And those 2 companies went on to become the largest meat alternative company in the world for a long time. Still, by the way, larger than Beyond Meat in total sales, even though it's not independently publicly traded, so people don't recognize that. And Daya is by far the largest non-dairy cheese company. And so when those businesses sold, first of all, my life changed, but also 2 things that were enabled. One is I started making investments myself, mostly as an angel investor, small investments. The second thing I did was, you know what? I think it's time that I actually prove that I know what I'm doing, that I'm not just telling people what to do without the experience myself. And so I took the risk, and within my agency, within my consulting firm, I decided to start my own food company. And that company was Ocean Hunter Foods. And what happened was I was looking at the market, and people were always hiring me and saying, sometimes people came to me with a product, but sometimes people came to me and said, I have some money, I want to make a difference, what should I make? All right, well, so we do what's called white space analysis, right? Where you look at the market and you say, where are there opportunities that are not being met? And the one that I've always identified was seafood. Everybody was making alternatives to beef and chicken and pork and milk, and now there was that company Just, which was doing eggs. But really, nobody had taken on seafood in an aggressive way. There were a couple players, but nothing really significant. And so I thought that was a really big opportunity. So I'm having drinks with a friend of mine one day, and we take out a napkin at the bar, literally, and we're drawing the back of the napkin. We decide to divide the seafood industry into segments, right? We're like, what is the seafood industry? How is it divided by channel, by type of seafood? And so we looked at, okay, there's premium seafood that's primarily sold in restaurants, like sushi, like caviar, like oyster, shrimp, things like that. There's mass market retail seafood, fish sticks and all that kind of stuff. And then there's low-end food service, like popcorn shrimp and fish sticks also, and fried calamari and other things that your kids might eat at a restaurant, right? And so we divided the industry, and we decided right then that we were going to go into starting to resolve that. And so he said, all right, you find one that's going to address one of these sectors, and I'll fund you, and I'll do the same. So he started a company called Good Catch, and I started a company called Ocean Hunger Foods. Ocean Hunger Foods, I met this chef. I'd been looking for a plant-based seafood opportunity. I met this chef, James Beard Award winner, certified master chef, the real deal, not vegetarian. But he had figured out a way to make tomatoes taste like super expensive raw tuna. Sounds ridiculous. And I thought, this is so nuts. It's either disgusting or brilliant. And so I went to his restaurant, I tasted the product, and I said, wow, this could change the world. Because I learned very early on that one of the ways that you get people to change their behavior is if you first wow them with a product and then you make it more accessible. And so if you look at what made non-dairy cheese start to take off, it wasn't all the plasticky soy cheeses that I had to grow up in. It was when people started coming out with really nice cashew cheeses and other things that started elevating the category, that people were like, oh, this is really good. And then they're like, all right, well, then maybe the other stuff is good too. And they start trying other things. And I thought, if we can convince people that something as good as a super premium tuna is good enough to convince them, then maybe they'll also go for the fish sticks and everything else, which are bigger market opportunities. And so what do? Well, we launched in 2017 in every single sushi bar at Whole Foods. And within a couple of years, we were the fastest growing plant-based company in the world, by far. Did $11 million in sales in the second year on one product, tomato tuna. And all things, and it grew really quickly. We sold it at Michelin-starred restaurants, we sold it at college campuses, we sold it all over the place. And it was going really well. I raised actually a really significant amount of money on unheard of terms. Nobody will get these terms ever again in the plant-based industry because of me. I raised what's called a convertible note, which means this is important for you, those of you who are going into investments. If you're doing private market investments like what I do, venture capital or angel investing, when you're very early, sometimes it's difficult for an investor and the entrepreneur to agree on a company valuation, right? Well, I think I'm going to be worth $1 billion because I expect we're going to do all these sales. And I'm like, all right, well, if I give you money, I'm helping you get there. So why should I pay for your potential? Well, the flip side is investors will say, well, I think you should be based, I should give you a valuation based on a multiple of your sales or your profits. And they're like, I don't have any. Okay, well, that's not fair. So a convertible note is we say, okay, look, I'm going to give you some money. And I don't know yet what piece of your business I'm going to get. We're going to punt on that decision. At a future time when you're more mature as a company, some bigger investor is going to come by and say you're worth X and you'll agree. And then I'm going to get my investment based on that, my share based on that decision, right? So I raised $6 million on these convertible notes in my seed round on what's called an uncapped note. Basically means that investors agreed to make almost no benefit for giving me their investment early on. I wouldn't do that, but I really appreciate it. Unfortunately, Ocean Hunger was a rocket ship up and down. We were exclusively in food service. So even when we were in retail, we were in the prepared food section. And when the pandemic hit, not only did restaurants and universities shut down, Google, where we did $2,000 a week in sales in each campus, they shut down, but also every single store we were in, Whole Foods, Loblaws and Sobeys in Canada, Wegmans, all these places also stopped selling prepared foods because nobody was going to the sushi counter to have freshly made fish. So unfortunately, the business had to be put on hiatus, and I sold the company to a gentleman who founded Gardein. And he owns it now, and he'll be relaunching the business. I'm not involved in that anymore. I moved on to start my new company, Mission Plant. So Mission Plant has 3 divisions. First, I make angel investments in food companies. Second, I consult companies who are looking to enter the market. So right now I'm in the middle of launching a plant-based egg company, which makes the world's first sunny side up and poached eggs plant-based. They're super amazing. Look for them soon. We're launching them next month. It's called Yo Egg for now. I'm changing the name soon. They are going to be launching at the National Restaurant Show in May, and then in restaurants in LA in the summer. I'm launching a new chicken product, which is the world's first whole cut chicken breast that starts raw, and you can cook it just like you would chicken. So you can have it boiled, broiled, poached, baked, roasted, grilled, you name it, just like you would a regular chicken breast. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm doing the consulting side. And then I also came to realize through my years of being an investor, entrepreneur, and consultant, that there were areas I wasn't happy in terms of the offerings that were being made to companies to help them succeed. And so I decided to form joint ventures with others to create new companies to support the whole industry. So the first one, I told you I own a research company. That's called Moonshot Collaborative. The second one was I really wasn't happy with the e-commerce options for plant-based products. So this past November, we launched plantbelly.com, direct-to-consumer retail site for over 1,000 plant-based curated food products, shipping anywhere in the US in 2 days guaranteed. And then my most recent businesses, which are launching very soon, I'm very excited about these. You guys are the first ones to hear about this, actually. So one of my employees asked me if I'd help him with an idea he had. He said, look, I know it's not your industry, but I'd really like you to help me incubate this business idea that I have. I said, okay. So these two are connected. Fractal Foods is a company that's going to help revolutionize the food industry by helping food companies and other actors in the food industry digitize their assets. And so we're helping people create NFTs, create smart contracts, get their supply chain on the blockchain, all those kinds of things. And Future Foods DAO, many of you probably don't know what a DAO is. That's okay, I'll explain it. A DAO is a community of people who come together on the blockchain, so digital universe and chat rooms and stuff, and they pool their money through the purchase of tokens. And then, so I buy tokens, we have a Future Foods token. I say, okay, I'm gonna give you this piece of paper that says you now own a piece of this group. In exchange, I'm gonna get cash from you, and we're gonna have a pool of cash. And then with that money, we're gonna democratically, collectively decide what to do with it. And particularly this group is being used to fund foundational research to advance the alternative protein and plant-based industries. See, traditionally, and this is a really interesting concept in digital, traditionally, intellectual property protections are actually quite disincentivizing to innovation. Most people think that because, if you open source things, meaning you share all your secrets with everybody, well, then you're not going to make much money on it because you can't protect that invention. That makes sense. But the other side of that is, if I can't share it, then it's really hard to advance it because I'm relying only on my core team to have know-how about how to improve it, and nobody else can come in and build on it. So what if I could figure out a way to open source and protect my financial interest? So you may have heard of these things called NFTs, and you've probably heard of them in the form of art, where an artist will make a digital painting and they sell it. And unlike a traditional painting, once they sell it, usually in the traditional market, if I sell my painting and somebody else buys it for 10 times as much a few years later, I can cut out. I get nothing. Well, in this case, because it's on the blockchain, my digital imprint is on it. And so if I'm an artist and I make that, I get a share of every single sale down the road. So now imagine that with intellectual property. This group funds an academic researcher to create a new machine to make cheaper plant-based meat, okay? And then that funding allows us to get a piece of the intellectual property shared with that inventor. And with our piece, we say, okay, Professor X, we're going to take our rights to this and we're going to license it to somebody else so that they can add their expertise on top of it to make it even more advanced. So you made it faster, this guy's gonna make it bigger, this one's gonna do this with it. And you accelerate the innovation. And everybody makes money because everybody is compensated for their portion of the innovation. You accelerate the research and you accelerate the growth. So it's fantastic financial opportunity and it really incentivizes more. So that company is launching next month. So I've spoken a lot. I'm really excited to be here. I want to thank you all so much for having me. Thank you to Josh and Clay for inviting me. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, now will be the moderated questions part. So we have a couple of questions right now, and so we wanted to use this time while the caterers and the students helping the caterers are up there preparing for the second part of the event. We'll be having these questions. So we're going to start off with some questions here, and then we will be taking questions from the audience. All right, so our first question today actually comes from Desmond Brock here. He's going to be the future vice president of the Westchester University Investment Group. So his question is, so what are the biggest challenges when investing in sustainable businesses and products?
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Desmond. So I think first we need to separate between the challenges that are specific to companies because they are sustainable or progressive business or products, and those that are just endemic to any business. One misconception is that businesses that are involved in social good, what we call ESG or triple bottom line, ESG is environmental, social, and governance. Or triple bottom line meaning not just profit, but also people and planet. One misconception is that these companies are actually less financially valuable or less able to grow, and that's actually not true. The fact is that in today's economy, building trust with consumers builds more brand loyalty and builds more motivation for people to get behind the business. And so very often actually having an ESG motivation is really inspiring consumers and can increase the business's success. Now, that doesn't mean that having a good heart makes you a good business. And one of the biggest challenges I face is working with entrepreneurs, I'll say from the consulting and investment side kind of, is working with people who have a personal story or personal passion for why they came to this kind of work and project that onto the market. I was speaking to an entrepreneur yesterday who has an autoimmune disorder that causes her to be unable to eat a lot of animal protein and soy and wheat gluten and rice and refined oils and other oils. And I heard her pitch, and she kept on injecting the fact that she knew it was a need in the market because she experienced it. And I had to push back and say, I'm not arguing there's not a need in the market, but the fact that you experienced something doesn't in and of itself mean that it is a pain point that is shared across enough consumers to make this a good business opportunity. The fact is, especially when it comes to food products, each unit, each product is a very small price point. And the margins aren't that big. So the amount of money I'm going to make if I sell one $3 bag of chips, I might make $1 myself total. Now that 60 cents might go to product and manufacturing. And so I might be left with 40 cents, of which lots go to marketing and sales for and overhead and rent and stuff. So I might get a couple pennies on that $3 bag of chips to be able to put towards profit. And so really you have to make sure that you understand that you have enough demand or enough interest in the market to drive repeat business, especially in these low price products, so that you're going to have enough business over a long time. If I sell diamond rings and I get everybody to buy one, I'm doing okay. If I get everybody to buy one bag of chips, I'm in trouble. That's not a good business. So that's a big part of it, is helping people step aside from their own personal passions and say, look, I love your passion. It can be a really great motivation. And I think you should carry that forward. I think you should be authentic to who you are. But we need to make sure that the assumptions you're making about what the market cares about aren't crossing.
Thank you for that. So our next question. So you're a man that puts on what many hats here, as we've seen. You started out a nonprofit, you moved into venture capital, consulting. Feedback. So for students here today, we have lots of different majors. I'm personally economics and finance. We have accounting, we have computer science, we have nutrition, we have environmental science. How would you recommend for a student at Westchester University who's trying to get into your line of work, since it is so broad? Where would you recommend to start? Who are the people to talk to? Or what would you do?
Sure, thank you. So a few things. Sorry. So there was a movement that came out around the same time that I started my business career I was actually adopting a practice without even knowing because it didn't exist when I first thought of it. It's called effective altruism. And the basic fundamental idea is that you can actually choose a career path or make choices about your daily actions based on the impacts you want to have. And so the movement has some extremes to it that we don't have to go into, but fundamentally, if you want to map out your career and impact as a part of it, then that should go into that. You should take that into account into what you do, but you shouldn't assume that the work that you're going to do has to be obviously limited to it. So, for example, I came out of school, and the reason I went to work at PETA and Farm Sanctuary and all these animal protection organizations was because at the time, I had no concept that I could help animals or help this movement in anything but working in those kinds of organizations. Because very few people have considered other paths to have this kind of impact. And over time, I came to realize there was another way. What I found in the last few years is that this industry is growing so quickly that we need people with every single skill set to jump in. And so I know people who are excellent videographers who are utilizing their skills day to day to advance this movement. I know people who are, chemists who are doing it. So no matter what role you have, you can make a huge impact on this kind of work. And so first is understand what you want to achieve, and then look at the industry that is advancing that. If it's this industry in particular, what I did, this is a little crazy. What I did was my year before I started my agency, I spent actually a year and a half mapping out the whole food industry. And I made a list of every single job from farm cleaner to barista and everything in between. And I did 150 informational interviews, which is all. I'm not recommending you do that. But I interviewed baristas, I interviewed the CEO of Coca-Cola. I just interviewed one person to understand what their role in the food industry was, and I said, who can you introduce me to? And I did it over and over and over again, until in my apartment, which was a junior web venture in a studio in Brooklyn, I had the entire wall taken up by a 20-foot whiteboard with like tiny little font of the entire food industry from farm to fork. And in that, I started to cross out the things that I was absolutely not qualified for. And I was like, there's no way in heck I'm going to be a chef, a farmer, a trucker, a food scientist. There's a lot of things that I do not have any skills for. But then I saw sales and marketing. And I was like, you know what? For the last however many years, I've been doing advocacy work and I've been doing fundraising work for nonprofits. And those skills were remarkably similar to sales and marketing. Because actually, I have been selling ideas and selling passion. But the difference was now I was letting people have something tangible in exchange. I'm not just telling you to do this thing because it makes you feel good. I'm telling you to do this thing to spend this money because you get to have this delicious item on the other side. And so I realized that was where I could fit. But I think everybody can find a path. If you're looking for your path, a couple of organizations to check out. One is the Good Food Institute. It's a nonprofit organization focused entirely on advancing the plant-based and alternative protein industries. And they have really fantastic white papers on where there are research opportunities that need to be filled, on where there are businesses that need to be started, on jobs that are available in the industry in lots of different kinds of roles. Good Food Institute, GFI.org, that's one place I look. And another one is plantbasedfoods.org, which is the website for the Plant-Based Foods Association, which is a trade group that represents the 200 plus plant-based food companies.
So our next question is from Josh. How does being vegan give you a unique perspective on the food industry? You talked about all this consumer research that you do, and how you're trying to capitalize on maybe a non-vegan or people that are looking to maybe reduce their meat intake, but not specifically trying to get one vegan to change to another vegan product. So does being vegan, has that given you a unique perspective on the food industry as a whole that sets you apart, or do you feel that it's hurt you not knowing what, non-vegans want, or how is that kind of balance?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm turning off all the feedback and then turn back on in a second. I think it's a mixed bag. I think on the one hand, I have no interest in eating animal products, but I do sometimes wonder if my taste buds aren't there anymore to be able to compare products. And so I always ask meeting friends to be able to speak, to how they experience products for me. I think my experience as a consumer is more powerful than anything. I surround myself with people who have best practices training, went to business school, who spent years running brands, around me are people who were in charge of cheese whiz, or in charge, I surround myself with those kinds of people who ran food companies with best practices and learned from right out of business school how to do everything by the books with unlimited budgets and like all the experts in your business. And then I bootstrapped it and did it myself. And with help from those folks, but often I'm the guy in the room with a bunch of people who are looking at the numbers, looking at the studies, and looking at the research, and I think it's all really important. And they all come up with a thesis, and then I hear them saying, this just doesn't sound like it's research. Or, I don't think it would be more of that. Like, oh, research, just think about it. Pull yourself away from what the research says and just think as a human for a second. And I think that's a really beneficial perspective for me, as long as I also surround myself with the right people. I'm usually able to step into a consumer's shoes better than some more possibly trained. As a vegan, I'm somebody who loves what I do because I want more food. And so I'm motivated to find food that satisfies my cravings and my hunger and my passion. I'm a foodie. Most people think that vegans aren't foodies. Let me tell you, I'm French. So I'm a foodie. Somebody can get me a really good vegan camembert. I'm stoked. I just had it the other day from a company in France that's just starting out. I can't wait to get mine. So yeah, my passion for food also speaks out.
The question for me, this is a little bit more along kind of the corporate strategy side from an investment perspective. Across all your ventures, do you find the need to capitalize on different dietary preferences, such as maybe people want to switch to low carb, or want to switch to sugar-free, or maybe fall into a keto diet? Do you see these different small dietary changes and preferences affect your industry as a whole, where you're already in, call it a niche of food preference, or is that exposure not really there?
Sure. So I think it's really about looking at the one question. I don't assume that the most effective way to market a plant-based product is saying it's plant-based. Right? That is not my starting line. In fact, rarely is that the most effective or most important thing to say. I really want to understand a category, and there's a concept in marketing called jobs to be done. And the idea is that you look at a product or a service and you try to think about what the consumer or the customer, if it's a business, needs, what their pain point is, what their problem is that they need solved for them. And specifically, you look at it in the idea of what they need to hire something for. And so, I needed to hire this to quench my thirst, right? And I fired this because I didn't want plastic anymore. Like, you think of it in those kinds of terms. And when it comes to understanding consumers' needs, rarely is the need first and foremost about something being plant-based, depending on the category. And so sometimes highlighting, prioritizing other dietary restrictions or preferences may be really key. When possible, I tend to really prefer to highlight things that make products additive in nature rather than reductive in nature. So usually being free of something or not something is less powerful than saying it is something. So for example, with the plant-based egg company that I'm launching, the sunny side up egg is extraordinary, but it's a little bit harder to make than a traditional egg. And we're going to make new restaurants for that reason. And it is an amazing sustainability story. It's an amazing animal welfare story. Health-wise, it's actually close to parity with that chicken eggs, but not exactly. It's like 5 grams of protein instead of 6. Like, it's close, but it's not perfect. It's not better. But when we look at the poached egg that they sell actually comes pre-formed. The yolk is in the middle, the white is already solid around it. You dunk it in boiling water, you take it out, and you cut it, and it's done, right? And so what we realized, I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I explained to her, and she said, well, why would you tell people it's plant-based? Why wouldn't you just focus on the fact that it's an easy egg? Like, and so I just trademarked Easy Poach, or Easy Poach, and it's going to be the first poached egg ready to eat in schools. Because we realized poached eggs are a huge pain in the neck today. And we did all these consumer research, and we found a lot of people liked it so much that they would choose it not because it was plant-based, but purely because they could have the poached egg experience more easily. That is a lot bigger opportunity than trying to convince people to switch their behavior and stop eating something.
All right, so that concludes our moderated questions. I'm going to invite Jasmine over here. If anyone has any last questions for anyone on the panel, for David, we would appreciate it. If not, we'll be heading up shortly. But yeah, so now's your time to ask questions.
Yeah, hope so.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Dave, thanks for your presentation. Ton of energy. I'm actually interested in the personal side. So you mentioned going from hippie activist to venture capitalist. How have things changed for you personally, time demands, emotionally, mentally, all that stuff? Love the energy. Want to know how that's changed between the two lifestyles.
Thank you so much. It hasn't changed much because one, I've always been somebody who's like this, who's a little bit high intensity. And two, no matter what I've done, it's always been about a higher purpose and about bigger impact. And so actually every decision I've made in my career has been about maximizing impact and how to do so strategically. So my first career in high school and college was actually in politics. And then I realized that I couldn't focus on just the issues I cared about because I had to compromise and work with politicians. And so then I started working with nonprofits because I could focus on certain issues. And then I realized I wasn't having the impact that I wanted to there, so I switched to business. But every single time, actually within the nonprofit world, I started on the advocacy side, and then I realized I wasn't really happy with the groups I was working with, so I decided I wanted to get to the top of them and fix them. And so I went to school for a master's in nonprofit management, and I also convinced them to move me into the development of fundraising departments. Because I realized if I wanted to change those organizations, I needed to know how to raise money, because that's how you get to the top. Then eventually I realized that wasn't working either. I went to business. So I failed a lot is one thing to say. But the other thing is that every angle was always, how can I take on the next challenge that would increase my impact? And so I worked $100 weeks back then, I worked $100 weeks back then. But then the difference is that back then I couldn't pay my bills and I slept on couches. That's the biggest difference. But in terms of lifestyle, I feel very fortunate that, my family's very supportive and, my chosen family are vegan and very supportive and have their own passions and things. My kid is happy and healthy and, life is good. And in terms of what I do every day, I think the one change I'd say is that in terms of mental health and happiness, not having to talk about negative things so often has been a very uplifting thing, right? It made a big difference for me when I was able to start saying, I'm working on solutions instead of banging my head against the wall about the problems. Not that the problems aren't serious, right? Look, I don't feel less passionate about the fact that we shouldn't be doing the things we're doing. But I made a decision at some point that focusing on that was not helping. Actually, I'll tell this story. When I was in college, I was an angry activist, right? I was into punk music, and I got into the activist world through punk music. And I mentioned I had purple hair and I had piercings, and I considered myself an anarchist and an anti-capitalist, and I was like protesting a lot. I was getting arrested a lot. Like I did a lot of crazy stuff, and arrested for activism. And I felt things very passionately. In fact, I think that I connect my passion for social justice work with having been bullied as a kid, and the fact that I felt really deep empathy for others who suffered, and that made me think about whether it was animals or other people or whatever else, and that was a big motivator for me. And so, what changed my perspective there was, in my heart, I was still a really caring person, but I had a lot of pain, and that was projected through anger. And I was handing out vegetarian leaflets one day in college with a guy that I really respected and a mentor of mine, and I saw him in his fur coat. And I said something really nasty and aggressive to him. And I don't know what it was, I'm not going to repeat it if I did, but it wasn't good. And The guy who I was with took me aside afterwards, and rather than yelling at me, being like, "You idiot, like, why would you do that?" he said to me, "I really understand the pain you're feeling. I know how hard it is to think about the suffering that you're going through." He said, "But have you considered if that's the most effective way to get her to change her problematic behavior?" And I said, "You're nuts. What are you talking about? There's no way that she would act differently if I was like nice to her about it." And he said, "Give it a shot." So he said, "Here's a piece of paper that talks about what's wrong with fur industry. Next time you see somebody wearing a fur coat, hand this to them instead." And they're like, I thought, all right, I'm gonna appease him and move on and go back to my lifestyle. And the next day I passed by a woman who was wearing a fur vest. And I bit my tongue, I took it out, and I said, "Excuse me, I hope you'll consider the impact of your actions." Gave her the cover. And I turned around and walked away, sitting there gritting my teeth and thinking that I had zero impact except for not wanting to get out my anger. And I hear running footsteps behind me and tap my shoulder, and I turn around, and this woman is in tears. And she's pulling her fur vest off, and she's throwing it, and she says, "Please take it from me. I'm so ashamed. My boyfriend got it for me, and I hate it, and I can't be seen in public anymore. Please take it." And it completely woke me up. And I thought, if that's how people react, if this is how I treated somebody when I was called out for behavior, or if somebody did that to me, I would not react on it. And it really woke me up. So today I get to celebrate victories, every little victory. And I'm so proud when somebody says to me, "I had a delicious plant-based meal today because you inspired me to do that." No matter what they ate yesterday, I'm really happy to do that, right? If somebody smokes and they quit smoking, and they have a cigarette, you don't say, "Let me just go back to 2 packs a day," right? So I'm a happier person and a healthier person because I'm focused on how we can do good as individuals and as an industry.
I got a couple of questions for you. So about 5 years ago, I had dinner with my first vegetarian/vegan. He was thinking about becoming vegan, but he was vegetarian at the time. And we were having dinner at a vegetarian restaurant. And I was asking him some questions about it. And he said, "I really love the taste of steak, but I don't like the ethical side of it. If they could make an ethical meat in a test tube, I would do it in a heartbeat." So where does that fit into the whole of everything that you're investing in and the kind of the other side of things? Like, how will that change as those things are starting to become more mainstream?
Sure. So the industry you're referring to is known as cellular agriculture, or colloquially known as lab grown. Though I don't tend to use that phrase because every food product from any processed food company starts in a laboratory, and then they're all run in factories. And that's the same exact way as that kind of product would be, so I don't tend to use that phrase, but I understand what you're talking about. Culture meat, something that is meat. The question, the answer to where it should fit in is really based on an individual's personal motivation for shifting the item or shifting the industry. And so if one is concerned purely about animal welfare or sustainability, is a fantastic solution, right? Billions of animal lives can be saved, and countless gallons of water, acres of land, and greenhouse gas emissions can be averted by using that instead. One thing I didn't mention in my talk, which I'll mention now, I forgot, is that it's an economic efficiency issue, right? It's a caloric efficiency issue. The fact is, the reason that the industry is so problematic, the reason it takes so much land, so much water, so many greenhouse gases to produce animal products, is because animals get their protein from plants, and then we get the protein from the animals. But they grow and they exercise and they move and they think and they breathe and they do all these things, and they burn calories. And so every single movement they make means that the amount of protein they receive is diluted. And so we're getting less protein out. So it's a caloric efficiency issue. So in that way, those kinds of products could be a massive solution to that. From a health perspective, if one is motivated by health, it won't be. Right? Primarily, they are replacing animal products, at least at the beginning, with the aim of doing it one for one with perfect pairing. I choose personally to focus most of my time, or I am supportive of the industry, and I think of it as aligned to my mission, purely because of my own expertise and passion. I focus more on the plant-based space because the plant-based industry is commercial today, and that industry is more in a research stage and not yet scaled. And so my skills and my experiences around marketing and sales and distribution and branding have very little value right now. But I have been hired by occasionally for little projects here or there by those kinds of companies to advise them on thinking through the commercialization strategy that they should deploy so that they can gear their product development accordingly. So for example, I was hired by a company called Mission Farms, which is making fats, animal fats in the lab for ducks, chickens, porks, pigs, and cows, pigs and cows. And they asked me whether they should sell as an ingredient to meat companies or plant-based meat companies to make the plant-based meat more meaty, or they should make their own sausages and stuff. And so I was helping think through that based on price points, based on how hard it would be for them to do it, based on margins, all kinds of things. So I support the industry, but it's not where I spend my time because I invest in companies that are ready to scale where I can help them, and I tend to consult in products where my skill set is more.
Thank you. The second question was, you talked about from an efficiency standpoint that, if you look at the grand scheme of the world, there's an exponential growth of the population. There's a limited amount of land, limited amount of water. At some point, there's a tipping point where governments are going to start looking at this and saying, hey, there's something here. Do you see the tipping point approaching? And what's that going to look like from your perspective when that happens?
Yeah, I mean, the point you raised is extraordinarily important, right? Meat consumption grows as middle classes grow. And particularly when you look in Southeast Asia and the Far East, particularly in China and India, you have massive explosions of middle class, and meat consumption is growing very rapidly. And the clip at which that's growing is outpacing any reduction we have in the West. And so this calamity is getting worse by the day. There's certainly movement in the right direction. And I'm hoping that it'll pick up even more quickly. There are a few countries that have officially lined up in this movement, but there are a few. Namely, the countries that have taken the biggest leaps are Singapore and Israel. Singapore, because it is an island economy that has almost no land for agriculture, is completely dependent on foreign imports for food, and because they believe that finding alternative ways to produce protein is key to self-sufficiency, and you find that a lot with island economies. Israel, because there is a very long-standing tradition of animal protection. It's the first country that ever put animal welfare into the Constitution, and there is a higher population of vegans in Israel than any other country in the world, by about 5x. Ironically, or not, also interesting, there are almost no flexitarians. It's a very either-or population. People are passionately vegan for animal rights or passionate. Whereas here you have a lot of people in the middle, only a tiny portion of people are vegan, like really hard work animals. So those two countries have done a lot and are continuing to do a lot. You see real movement in the Netherlands and in Germany. And then you have a lot of countries that are very reticent, where you'd expect to see that because of culinary tradition or agricultural tradition. In the United States, it is very hard to make policy movement that shifts our diet away from sugar beets, corn, soy, cotton, beef, poultry, eggs, or pork. Because as a country that is agrarian in nature, where the public system means that smaller rural populations get a lot of the same voice as larger urban populations, those large farms are represented very heavily. And so you have a very powerful lobby. It's also the only country where the federal government agency that's set up to regulate the food industry is the same one that's set up to advocate for farming. So imagine if you had the EPA also responsible for promoting arsenic. Because the USDA puts out the guidelines saying we should eat less sugar, and they also have subsidies for sugar beets. And they do the same thing, they put out saying we should reduce how much cheese we eat because it's high fat. And then the same month, they helped Domino's come out with Domino's pizza come out with cheesy crust, which would increase the amount of cheese in the pizza 3x because it helps sell clients. So our system is a harder one to do.
Thank you.
So let's keep it to one more question for time's sake.
So it's starting up here at one.
Yeah, so you said all of your products are with the carbon footprint. How do you guys see with the vegetarian lifestyle decrease carbon emissions over time?
What kind of impact is it having over time thus far?
Yes.
So the numbers of people who have changed their diets in this direction are outpaced substantially by the number of people who have increased meat consumption globally. So I can hope that we've reduced the damage or slowing the growth rate somewhat. But it takes everybody, right? We all need to do our part. And I think, like I said, the beautiful thing is that we can all do it, even if it's step by step. But no, today we have not reduced the problem yet. We are not at a point where we're preventing, climate crisis. We're not at a point where we've prevented the proliferation of antibiotics that are creating, antibiotic-resistant diseases from spreading to human populations. All the things that we're hoping to avoid, we need all hands on deck for it. I choose to try to focus on the positive, and I think that offering solutions is, as a global solution, offering industry level and government level solutions is the biggest way to move on the supply side. Or the demand side, it's up to you, right? It's every one of us, and we all have to make those choices. I don't like to sound catastrophic and to focus on those things, but it is a crisis. I mean, Al Gore, a decade ago, I heard Vice President Al Gore speak at Columbia's University Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And he went up and he said what he's very famous for saying. He said we have $22 trillion in subprime carbon assets, which meant the entire economy is based on an industry in which we believe that we can continue to drill for oil until it's all gone. And we're investing in pieces of paper as if those are real assets that we have. But the truth is, if we actually unearthed all of those trillions of dollars of assets, we don't need it. And so he made the point, this is cute to talk about these trillions of dollars in assets, but we can't access them, so they're not real. And to count on them, to make investment decisions on them is deadly. And I would say the same thing. We have trillions of dollars in subprime animal farming assets. You can look at a group called FAIR, Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return. One of the largest venture capitalists in the world, Jeremy Cullen, has brought together over $40 trillion in fund managers to align their statements that large food companies need to be moving away from animal agriculture. And these are not, progressive hippie investors. This is Steve Cohen, this is, Dwight Banana, this is major private equity and hedge funds that are saying, we've got an economic crisis on our hands, which happens to also be a world crisis. So yeah, I think we have to make serious choices for ourselves. And I hope that you'll help me by making those steps in your own lives while also joining me in making it more delicious and more wholesome.
So I think that's going to wrap us up for questions here. So thank you, David. Just have a quick few closing remarks here. So this will be the last event for the year for Veg Out and West Group. So I just want to say I'm very thankful for everyone throughout the year. It's been really an honor to be able to lead you all. I was at the Hunger banquet last night, and the guest speaker said something that he wouldn't be where he was today if he didn't have the village of people around him to support him. So I just like to thank, my villages in Veg Out, my family, West Group, for random connections with the Director of Student Leadership and Involvement that connected me with David, a random venture capitalist in New York, who I would have never elsewise met, and allowed us to have this event today. I also just want to say we got this gift here for David. It's a coffee mug. But, I know it's corny, but we also made a $100 donation to Chili's on Wheels New York, which is a group that apparently David actually knows the owner. But they give one vegan meal to those experiencing food insecurity. So we thought that'd be a little bit more impactful than Westchester University t-shirts, because that's how they were. I would just like to invite Clay up briefly, just to give a few remarks. Clay's a graduating senior. He's kind of taking on a mentor role for me. I really appreciate him. This is officially his last investment group with them as well. So, Clay.
Appreciate it. All right. I was going to say, while this is a split event between Veg Out and investment group, it certainly would not be possible without the group between the two. So thank you. But for those of you that are here for investment group, I was going to say thank you, one, for coming. But this is also events like this that allow us to have the impact that we've had for the past 5 years, and hopefully for many years to come. People coming, not only students, but the surrounding communities coming together, whether it be for the support of vegan rights, whether it be for the support of students after college, coming together for a common cause to be able to build community and support each other. And that's something that Josh has done very well with Veg Out, and something that investment group has been able to do very well also. So I wanted to say thank you once again to everybody for coming. I guess this is my last investment group meeting, so peace out. But yeah, thanks so much, everybody.
The caterers over the prep time. The event's not over. The fun is in dime. We're gonna be heading out to bars, B and C, where I think we have budgeted $1,000 worth of 100% plant-based catering.